Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Vitaly Golomb. He's a partner at Drakestar in the San Francisco office, and he leads the global mobility and energy transition team. Vitaly, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been a little while.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. You were my 10th guest a number of years ago, and now you will be probably the 510th-ish episode. So it's kind of cool that there's like about 500 episodes in between this time and the last time we chatted. But excited to have you back. I think what you've done in that period of time and what you're doing now, selfishly, I'm super fascinated to learn more about. But before we get into that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
So I was born in Odessa, Ukraine. My family were refugees out of the Soviet Union. We immigrated to San Francisco first, and then moved quickly after that to Silicon Valley. So I grew up in Cupertino, California. Went to college here as well. Got started very, very young. As a teenager, I was the youngest employee of Kinko's. I was also the youngest person to, at that time at least, to have get my own mortgage on my before my 19th birthday. So I was eager to grow up, and I did it here in Silicon Valley, which is a great place to grow up. And at that point, I didn't really have much context, all the history here. But of course, since then, have been deep in the tech world my whole career.
Very cool. So what did you take in university and why? And what got you passionate about tech at an early age?
That's a loaded couple of questions. So my educational background, my degree is in computer and video imaging with a minor in digital audio. The reason I studied that is because this is something that I was already doing professionally. I was a self-taught designer as a teenager. And by the time I finished my degree, I was already running pretty large teams in the dot-com days. With people twice my age reporting to me. They, I always had a little facial hair. They didn't really realize how young I was, but
that's awesome.
But there's a great story about how I couldn't go to Dave & Buster's one night with my engineering team because I was only 20 years old and they wouldn't let me into the bar. So that's how that's my educational background. How I got started is actually I still have my best friend from childhood. His father moved a company called Paragraph from Russia to Silicon Valley, and we would be running around the office. We did different computer shows and things as 12 and 13-year-olds, and really that's when the bug bit. We also, this is back before World Wide Web. We'd run bulletin board systems on our home computers, so we would stay up all night and turn off all the ringers so people can dial into our home modems and chat, exchange files, whatever back in the day. So that's really where it all started, pre-web. Alex and I then later, when we were both in college, we started a design firm together. And then that was kind of, second, third business, and kind of that's how I got started in business.
Very cool. So walk us through the rest of your career up until Drakestar, probably just with some highlights along the way, because you've done an astronomical amount of stuff throughout your career.
Yeah, when I talk to potential investment banking clients these days, I tell them I'm the Benjamin Button of banking because I went kind of backwards into it. Usually people start their career in investment banking, they'll go to business school, and then they'll become a grunt in investment bank and work crazy hours and learn finance and deal making that way. My career is quite backwards from that. I started out as a young entrepreneur. When my parents told me in high school, you can do whatever you want as long as you get straight A's. I got straight A's and put on raves in Oakland.
Cool.
So my 18th birthday party was 4,000 kids dancing around to electronic music back before it was cool in a sweaty warehouse. So I was always very entrepreneurial, and I got involved in dot-com days. I got recruited into some pretty high-flying companies. Unfortunately, none of them exited and became billion-dollar companies back then. Otherwise, I'd be in a different trajectory, perhaps. But during the dot-bomb days, I went back to what I knew well, which was design and the printing industry, by way of me being involved in Kinko's, which is now FedEx Office, for those who
Right.
don't remember Kinko's. So I ran a printing company that I co-founded, and then we sold that, and I started a design firm that quickly grew through to 3 offices. And in the agency business, it's a little bit of a grind. You kind of eat what you kill. You have crazy hours, but you're not really building any kind of goodwill. If you stop selling, you stop earning, and the agency kind of fades away. It's really a service business. So realizing that after a few years of that grind, and working with a lot of startups at the time, and helping them build brands or build software products or what have you, realizing, hey, I can do this too. I decided to start a company called Keen, which was the first software as a service e-commerce platform for the graphic arts industry. So what that means is basically shopping carts, very complex shopping carts for the printing world, to do complex estimates and complex design in the browser, things like that. We were the only venture-backed company in the space. I spent about 6 years working on that, learned lots. It was a small acquisition at the end. And then I joined Hewlett-Packard, whom I got to know through that company, after HP split into 2 companies, HP Inc. and HPE, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. So I joined HP Inc. to help start the corporate venture arm, HP Tech Ventures. Spent a couple of years there to build that out. By that point, I was heavily involved with a number of accelerators and funds. So I was very much in the venture world as well, being a founder, but also being on the investment side of the table. And spent a couple of years at HP. That was a very interesting experience. It was the first time in my career in a large company, and dealing with, kind of learning how to navigate the politics and everything at the top of a Fortune 100 company.
Sure.
And that was quite an experience. But I was always an entrepreneur, and I got an opportunity to kind of split off with a partner and start an investment bank and potentially start a venture fund of our own. We started the firm, GS Capital, with a partner. We grew pretty well to a staff of small team. And at a certain point, I started losing deals to bigger investment banks in mobility space. And we'll come back to that more, I suppose. But I needed a larger platform, so I joined Drakestar about a year ago in September of 2020, middle of COVID, and merged my practice with Drakestar. So now I lead the mobility practice globally. We have partners in the U.S., partners in Europe, and I also am serving as a CMO of the firm as well, with my agency background. So that's kind of a quick and dirty. I published a book about 4 years ago. I think that's the last time we spoke.
Totally.
Called Accelerated Startup. That book has done well. It's been translated now in Ukrainian. I obviously have roots there, and it's being used by a number of accelerators and business schools as a textbook for entrepreneurs.
Congrats, man. That's really awesome.
Thanks for that. It's been a whirlwind. What can I say?
No, that's great. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into what exactly does global mobility and energy transition actually mean, and what types of stuff are you guys partnering on and investing in?
Yeah, so as an investment bank, we get hired by companies to sell themselves or buy another company or do some other complex transaction, like a corporate carve out, meaning sell a division of a big company. We are helpful on raising capital for companies as well. Usually, tech investment bankers get involved kind of later stages, so we're not involved. It would be a bad look for somebody to have an investment banker go and pitch them to seed VCs or Series A. That's really up to the CEO at that point. But that's kind of what we do as investment bankers. I do some angel investing on the side as well, of course. And as far as the sector that we're in, mobility is everything electric, everything autonomous, and all the infrastructure for it. So the energy transition part of it is the charging networks, the energy generation, all that infrastructure that has to exist for that kind of future mobility to work. And I work with companies, on the road, on land, on sea, and in the air. So we're doing some aviation projects as well. It's been a passion of mine for a long time. I have some hours in the left seat of an airplane.
That's awesome.
So it's a normal progression. You get the sports cars, motorcycles, and airplanes. That's normal. for
Sure.
us. So yeah, so that's what we do is we help companies that are growing very quickly to take next steps and get all the way to public markets in some cases if they are selling themselves to a SPAC, for example. And we can talk more about how that works. That's been kind of quite a buzzword recently.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. That was going to be actually my next question. So do you want to maybe tell us what that is?
Yeah, so SPACs, special purpose acquisition companies, are basically public shells. These are empty companies that file to go public, and it's relatively easy for them to get public and raise some money, and then they use that money to go and find a company to buy, a private company that they can take public. And so it's kind of a bit of a reverse merger in that sense. And that has existed for a number of years, but in the last year, that has become very, very hot and very hypey kind of a thing to happen. And there are a lot of very futuristic companies which have revenue very much in the future tense, that are going public, and a lot of them happen to be in the mobility space. It works quite well because you can go and say, okay, here's our business plan. In 4 or 5 years, we expect to make $1 billion profit. Here's how we're going to get there. For us to get there, we need to raise $500 million now to build a factory.
Right.
And so that works well for mobility type of deals, because you have companies that need to build factories and manufacture things. Software is a lot easier to scale, but hardware, you need to have a physical factory to build something. So a lot of mobility companies have gone public that way. There are a few that refuse to. They're taking the more conventional path. But at the end of the day, when all the hype wears off, you can think of SPACs as kind of an easier way, kind of an earlier stage, cheaper, faster way of companies going public. And after Enron and after the dot-com days and a number of things that happened, there was a new compliance that was passed, SOX compliance, Sarbanes-Oxley, and what that means is it became more expensive and more tedious for companies to go public. So you can think of this as kind of a little bit of a hack to make it easier for earlier stage companies to get to the public market.
Got you. Okay, interesting. So how much quicker and how much cheaper is this route?
It can be half the price and
Oh,
and half
wow.
and then half the time, right?
Okay.
For a company to go public, depending on what stage and how big their aspirations are, it could be an 18-month process, right? To
Oh, wow.
go
So
public.
really quick then.
Yeah, I mean, for the SPAC, in the beginning of the year, there was a lot of hype, and these deals got done, very, very quickly in a matter of days.
Oh, wow.
We're coming back to kind of normal, where it takes takes companies maybe 6 months to get through this process with the SPAC, from the initial agreement to due diligence and their audits. They're subject to the same audit requirements of any other public company. It takes some time to do that. Then you need to raise the pipe. So without getting too much more technical, it normal process would be, let's say, 4 to 6 months, something like that.
Okay, got you. So obviously we're going through a transition where we're depending less on oil and gas, and I think everybody kind of would probably say that's fair to say, just because basically most car manufacturers have said by a certain date we're not really making any more gas powered vehicles. But like, where are we actually at in the space and the actual energy transition? Because it's very complicated. It takes a number of years. You have a lot of corporations and governments and countries and a bunch of kind of red tape that we need to get through. So where are we at, or what are your thoughts on the state of the industry right now?
So I just had on my podcast, I had Mate Remats, the CEO of Remats Technologies and now Bugatti Remats. And I got to tell you, when I've known the company for about 9 years, since almost their beginning, and I helped raise their Series B round back in 2017. That was one of my kind of cornerstone projects so far. Now that they're getting so much more famous, but I got to tell you is that at the time when we're out there talking to investors about this electric hypercar company that provides technology to other car makers, it was not a given. There was no belief in saying, it wasn't. Right now it's inevitable, right? Electric vehicles, you don't have to convince anybody that that's the way everything's going. That's where it's going. Period. So That part is easier. But that said, we're only at something like 2% of passenger vehicles sold worldwide are electric. I expect that to change quite a bit in the next 12 months. You're going to see a lot of new electric vehicles come to market, and they're quite compelling. But you have to keep in mind that most of the car sales are not the expensive luxury vehicles. They are much cheaper, 30,000 and under type of cars around the world. All right, you have to think outside of US. US is only, I don't know, 20, 25% of the automotive market. So to make all that work, you need kind of the economies of scale in production, in battery technology, and all these things to bring down the cost. You also need to make it easy to charge vehicles. So a lot of charging infrastructure is going in place. If we look at China and Europe, the two main things that have been driving this are government regulation and government incentives. At one point, Beijing city government said, you know what, we don't like the pollution. We're going to make all the taxis in Beijing electric. And they basically announced that and said, here's a timeline. It was a very short timeline. I don't remember the exact details now, but it was converted that way. In Europe, there's been a lot of push and a lot of incentives towards converting to electric. In US, we're about to see more of that with the Biden administration and the infrastructure plan. And then all the infrastructure is going in as well, right? The infrastructure plan is planning to pay for 500,000 electric chargers. To give an idea, right now we have about 50,000 or fewer chargers in the US. So it's going to be a huge jump and kind of ubiquitous charging everywhere. So people won't have an excuse to say, oh, well, I can't charge my vehicle where I live. Therefore, I'm going to keep driving this, dead dinosaur powered vehicle. So yeah, I mean, the infrastructure piece is very, very important. And then there are a couple of other interesting things happening in aviation because batteries are heavy. There's a lot of companies looking at hydrogen. Right? You still have an electric motor, but instead of flying with heavy batteries, you have hydrogen on board that generates electricity for that motor. And there's some progress there, but we're still probably a decade away from real, commercial flight on hydrogen, maybe less. Okay. And then same thing with long distance trucking. It makes sense to use hydrogen in that case because you need long distances, you need a lot of power, but you're also going from one point to another. So the infrastructure that you would need for fueling up hydrogen could be in certain places, and it doesn't need to be ubiquitous. If you buy a Toyota Mirai now, which is a hydrogen powered car, I think the only one on the market, you're going to find out that you're very limited in options on where you can fuel up.
Sure. You basically could probably fuel up at home and maybe a couple other places in a major big city.
I don't think you'll be able to fuel up at home because you're not going to have a hydrogen station at home. That's the issue, right? You have to live close to a hydrogen station. The fill up is quick, right? It's just like pumping gas, but you're very limited on where you can get it. The last thing I'll mention on this is working with companies like Hyperloop TT. That's kind of next generation, right? We're talking about very efficient electric transport at the speed of airplanes on the ground, and you're talking about from city center to city center instead of going to airports, going through security and all that, like we're dealing with now. It's a few years out, but it's not as far as people think. It could be as soon as about 3 years from now, you'll be taking your first rides in a Hyperloop.
Interesting. That fast, hey? That was going to be my next question, actually, because I feel like, yeah, with something like the Hyperloop and potentially maybe other forms of transit outside of the traditional automobile, we could really see other ways to get around, right? Like potentially even almost like drone type things that could carry a passenger or a couple passengers maybe around different cities. Do you see stuff like that? Kind of like Jetsons type stuff, or what are your predictions for the kind of immediate future?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these things are constrained by regulations, right? So, you're not going to see a bunch of VTOLs flying around tomorrow. The companies that are going to go out first are going to be essentially flying within the regulations of helicopter flight. Okay. And they're going to be piloted, right? That's the first things you'll see out there. You're going to be able to change one variable at a time. That variable will be that it's an battery electric vertical takeoff and landing thing, call it whatever you want, but it will take off like a helicopter, and some of them have rotating fixed wings that will then fly as efficient as the reason airplanes fly long distances is they're a lot more efficient shape than helicopters. So you want that vertical takeoff, then you have rotating propellers that will pull you forward essentially, and use lift off a wing. So you'll see those. There's an interesting company in Australia. I'm not sure how far out of stealth they are, but I spoke with them just literally yesterday, and they are launching a single-seater racing, kind of maybe 6 or 10 feet off the ground at 200 miles an hour, races in these pods that look like they came right out of Star Wars.
That's cool.
And their idea is to launch with that, and then eventually offer this as kind of an expensive toy, kind of a hypercar type of price point. But imagine you have a hypercar that flies at that speed. So very cool things happening. It's just going to take a lot of time. One thing that's constrained as far as things in the air is that we're still working on a 90-year-old, radar-based, human-based air traffic control system. And the way, I like to point out that, first of all, there's no rush. There's nothing that goes fast in the aviation industry.
Right.
As far as adoption of new technology, it took like 10 years for GPS to be accepted as kind of a primary, most reliable device.
Wow.
But what has to happen is that we need to go to an automated satellite-based air traffic control before we can put tens of thousands of little things flying around, complex airspace. In Bay Area, we have 4 overlapping international airports and a military airport. Very complicated airspace. I talk about it because I have some seat time. I've flown airplanes. I've learned to fly airplanes.
That's cool.
So it's very complicated thing to do. You're going to see some things, flying in other places that are not so complex. You might see autonomous delivery drones that are pulling heavier weight before they pull passengers. But it's just going to take time. People have to be patient.
Sure. So you honestly think that something like the Hyperloop or some of these delivery drones are only 3, 5, maybe even 10 years out?
The Hyperloop, I can tell you from firsthand experience because I'm involved with a company called Hyperloop TT, which is the first company that was organized to commercialize the Hyperloop concept back in 2013. I would say, it just depends on some funding, some government participation, but the technology is pretty much there. Technology is ready to be integrated, very efficient. The Hyperloop TT at least will generate more power than it uses. Because the entire tubes will be covered with photovoltaics, and they have a very efficient propulsion system. That's a kind of an active maglev. So that I can talk about. On the aviation side, I think it's just going to take long because regulation is going to take long.
Right.
The technology is getting there. We're starting to see some first test flights. NASA just last week was testing Joby. The Joby is probably the most, the best funded eVTOL, and they're probably the first ones that got started. They're a 10 or 11-year-old company now. So,
wow.
They've been working on it for a long time. Technology is getting there. Now it's a matter of getting all of the everything else lined up, as far as regulations and how this business will actually work.
Sure. So on the Hyperloop company that you mentioned, have they signed any cities or are they working with any cities right now to actually start building something in the next few years, or is it still too early on that?
They have agreements that they've announced with a number of different countries, probably over 10. I'm trying to think what I can talk about publicly and what I can't.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Okay, so it's actually happening then.
It's definitely happening. There was a feasibility study even published for the Great Lakes region about a year and a half ago, or a little more now, and it's taking next steps, which is the environmental feasibility study, and this is basically for a particular route to go from Chicago to Cleveland to Pittsburgh. So that's what we're talking about there. Yeah,
that'd be
even
really
in the
cool.
U.S. Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah, imagine going Chicago to Pittsburgh in under an hour, and from city center to city center.
Yeah, that'd be wild, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I'm curious to get your thoughts on that I've read a bit about over the years is where, and obviously with Bezos and Richard Branson just kind of going to the edge of space there, like actually having either some sort of like supersonic flights, or where you go, like you leave Earth's atmosphere a little bit and then kind of come back, so you could basically go to like New York to Tokyo in a few hours and kind of commute. Like do you think some sort of like kind of light space travel is in our near future? Or are we very far away from that?
I think it's a calculation of, I mean, safety and energy use, right? If you have, it takes an incredible amount of energy, whatever energy you use. And I'm not a rocket scientist,
Sure.
but it takes an incredible amount of energy to get out, to go that far into space, right? You can see how big the rockets are to just have a small payload that goes out there. So, sure, can they shoot somebody and then land them on the other side of the world? Put them into like a small orbit? Yeah, they could probably do that now. But it's going to be a question of, what kind of emergency do you need to spend that kind of fuel to get
Right.
across the world? There's much more efficient ways of getting there in a reasonable amount of time. What's interesting is the work being done on kind of replacing what used to be the Concorde with much faster cross-Atlantic flight. What's preventing that is the sonic boom, right? That's the reason that that it could only fly over water, because it's very, very loud. Sonic boom is not just once. That's how you hear it. But it's when something's going faster than the speed of sound, it's a continuous noise that follows it, at the ground level, right, and all around. And it's incredibly disruptive, not just inconvenience for us hearing it, but for animals, for a lot of other things. So there's now research, I think NASA is doing it, on creating different shapes that will lessen that sonic boom, the strength of it. And if you can apply that, it's just essentially a very, very long airplane, right? So you have this air pressure that gets dissipated over a much longer shape. If you can take those physical principles and apply them towards a big passenger plane and fly that across the Atlantic, across the Pacific, and if you make it quieter, you can fly coast to coast, and it's not going to be an impact when you're flying over land. So those things are really cool, and that would be a pretty much more reasonable cost than launching 5 people in a rocket to land them on the other side of the world a few hours faster.
No, that's really cool. Yeah, like I think it seems like we're kind of at like the golden age, or like the beginning of the golden age of all this stuff. Is that fair to say?
I think, yeah, we're definitely in this transition point right now. I would say there's something really interesting happening, especially with like Hyperloop. Hyperloop is a completely new form of transportation.
Right.
And the audience, you guys will have to forgive me that I'm such a proponent. I'm a big believer. I've been working with these guys for a couple of years now. That's kind of a new paradigm, right?
Right.
And it gives you a new alternative. And you have things like, for example, in France, there's a law that says that if there's a train alternative, then there should not be a kind of a regional flight. And they're trying to, a flight, it's very visible, but at the end of the day, it doesn't, statistically, it doesn't pollute as much as other sectors. Actually, transportation as a whole, we saw with COVID, half of transportation went away overnight, and we only had 5% reduction in emissions worldwide. If somebody wants to save the planet, we should think about eating less meat, because cattle production is the third biggest polluter after U.S. and China as countries.
Right.
So that is a tangent, but no, I think we are in a very exciting time, because we have a couple of things coming together, and it's kind of a melt of digital and physical worlds, where we have artificial intelligence. We have enough processing power and techniques now to where artificial intelligence and automation that's driven by it will start making a much bigger impact on our lives. If we think about, we're in the middle of the next industrial revolution, really. And what's going to happen at the end is we're going to have a lot of automation at the end of it. Whereas first industrial revolution was 80 years, second one was about 65 years. This one we're going through in a matter of one generation, of about 20 years. And we're right in the middle of it. So it's an exciting time to be alive, because the next 10 years will be bigger changes in the last 50, as far as technology and capability and economics and everything else. What that also means is that a lot of people will not be able to make the transition. You're not going to take somebody who has maybe a high school education or didn't finish high school and is, making a living with their muscles, driving a truck or working, in construction or what have you. There are many, many people who do that. You're not going to be able to retrain them to be software developers overnight. So what do you do? How do you support them when those jobs go away? I mean, we have a preview in America. A lot of the manufacturing jobs went first to cheaper countries. and now they might be coming back, but they're going to be highly automated, right? So
Right.
maybe manufacturing will come back to the U.S., but you're not going to have 1,000 people. You're going to have 10 people running a factory where 1,000 people used to work before. So these open up some really interesting political questions and economic questions, and how do we do this? How do we support people? Because the preview is you can see the strife in the last half decade in this country. A lot of people are pissed off and they're feeling like they're falling through the bottom of the economy, where others are really doing well. And then we get clowns like Trump who are taking advantage of people who are unfortunately kind of on the other side of this equation. So that's something to think about for sure.
No, yeah, interesting. Very, very cool. So I'm curious because you've obviously been an entrepreneur. Now you're on the investment side. You've kind of wore both hats, and you've mentored a ton. You've been in the space a lot. What advice do you give to people that are looking to be an entrepreneur, from your entrepreneurial side and kind of from the VC side? Because I think there's not a lot of VCs that have been an entrepreneur, right? And I think it's rare when somebody like yourself has been both and can understand both sides and then can give advice to really help both sides, really.
Yeah, I would say a lot of actually VCs have operational experience. Investment bankers are a little bit more transactional and more kind of theoretical, let's say, or they come from big business maybe.
Sure.
But a lot of VCs, you have to build kind of a truffle nose and do some pattern recognition on what works and what doesn't, and you'll find a lot of it's kind of you're a player on the field, and then at some point you retire and you become a coach. That's kind of tech entrepreneurship and venture capital.
Sure.
But my advice to anybody that who's looking at entrepreneurship as their career path, it's important to not just be in love with the idea of entrepreneurship, but find a market-based problem that you can solve. Find something that you can work on. And do your research. Don't just jump on the next idea, because if it's going to work, you're going to dedicate a big chunk of your life to it, right? People forget that it takes a couple of years to figure out if anybody cares about. It takes a year to take any idea and to build anything, right? To research anything.
Sure.
It takes a couple of years for anybody, for you to figure out if anybody cares about what you built. So that's 2 years of your life right there. And if it's working, if it's kind of working, you're going to kind of muddle along for another year or two or more. If it's really working, that's a decade of your life you're going to give to this business, and you'll be pretty damn sure that this is something you're passionate about, that you want to work on and dedicate your life to. A lot of people forget about that. And the other thing too is that if it's worth doing, if it's not something that's already been solved or figured out, it's going to be very difficult, and it's going to have a very high failure rate, right? And so think of it as a science experiment. You have this thesis, you're going to embark on trying to solve this problem, and at some point, you're going to be you're either going to solve it or not, and it's going to be very difficult for you. And for a lot of entrepreneurs, their sense of identity gets tied to the success or failure of the company.
Sure.
And they really don't have any other hobbies. They don't have a life, and they really get emotionally connected to it. And if it doesn't work out, they get depressed. I know a lot of people that have gone through this. I've gone through this myself, quite honestly. Is that when it's not working and you have nothing else going, it's pretty crappy feeling. So it's important to have that kind of separation. It's important to do your homework and make sure you're working on something that the market cares about, that has a future, and that you have you're confident that you have the right solution, and even more importantly, the right team to go after and solve that problem. Not just an idea. Nobody cares about ideas. It's all about execution.
No, I 100% agree with you. So you mentioned your book earlier. I want to talk about it briefly because it's obviously been doing really well. So what's the book called? Who's it for? And let's talk a bit about that.
The book is called Accelerated Startup, and it is available, Amazon audiobook, hardcover, softcover, whatever you like, whatever your flavor. It's already been translated, as I mentioned, in Ukrainian, and the book is for people who are about to be or already are entrepreneurs and are thinking about, especially building the first startup. And what I've done is, I've gone around the world. I've spoken in, I've keynoted in over 30 countries, and I've met many thousands of entrepreneurs. And everybody thinks that they have the unique problems, but in reality, it's the same problems over and over again with a different accent. So what I was trying to do is save the first couple of years of pain and suffering for entrepreneurs and give them the answers to a lot of these obvious questions they're going to have. And the book kind of walks through from idea to product to company, kind of this whole process of how do you go from something that you're thinking about, or you're in love with entrepreneurship and you don't even have an idea. How do you find an idea? How do you build a team? How do you talk to customers? How do you raise money? How do you think about the exit? If it's not working out, what do you do? If it's working out, and you've done well, what should you do next? Should you mentor the next generation? So kind of soup to nuts, start to finish. And with the book, actually, something a little bit more current. As I mentioned before we hit record, we're launching a cohort-based course, a 5-week course on pitching, which is one of the key skill sets that entrepreneurs need to have when they go out there and start talking about their idea and their product and their company to investors, to potential teammates, employees, to customers. They need to be able to pitch that idea and get the passion in there. So we're launching a course called Pitching Like a Boss. It comes from from the book and also from workshops that I've been doing with the same name for many years now, and that's launching soon. So that's my part of giving back. Yeah.
No, that's great, because I think as somebody that's done pitching before, not only is it really hard to come up with a good deck, and you spend obviously hours and hours doing this, but then refining it and getting rejected, and then just being nervous about pitching, and like there's so many things that go into that. So it's cool that you're putting that out there, and I think that's a really good resource for people.
Yeah, we're hoping it's going to help a lot of people get their ideas across better and faster and be more successful. Quite frankly, a lot of times it's you're dealing with an audience that just doesn't have the you don't have their attention for long, and you need to make an impact, get an emotional response, and get them to want to learn more. So we walk through that. We walk through even things like body language, very important in any kind of presentation, and what kind of message you send there. So that's we're excited about launching that, and we'll see how it goes. It's we can put the links and all that into the show notes, but golomb.net is my website. You can learn a little bit more there.
Perfect. And you also host a podcast called Accelerated. What do you cover there, and what types of guests do you have on that?
So I launched Accelerated last year during COVID, as many people have launched podcasts, and the idea was to kind of highlight some friends and some folks I don't know well who are successful entrepreneurs, and to talk about some really important topics and kind of teach from their experience. We're doing a second season right now, which is all focused on the future of mobility. So I've interviewed people like Stefan Kraus, who was CFO of BMW and CEO of Canoe, took that company public via SPAC. I have CEO of Hyperloop TT, Andres de Leon, as well. And the latest episode that just came out this week is Mate Rimac, the founder and CEO of Rimac Automobili and now Bugatti Rimac. So just kind of walking through that and talking about the little history about what they've gone through in building these companies, what they've learned, what their thoughts are on the future of mobility.
Sure, very cool. So we're kind of coming to the end, but is there any advice that you always give to people that you maybe just you've learned over the years that you seem to, no matter who they are, you give that advice to kind of close out the show?
So the way I close out my show is that I ask my guests if what advice they would give them their 18-year-old self or just starting their career.
Sure.
And I'll do the same. For entrepreneurs, it's very important, this element of kind of having a healthy separation between your sense of identity and the projects you're working on. For a lot of people, this kind of goes into the mental health category. It's very difficult to build startups, and it's a grind, and you need to find ways to stay motivated for many, many hours, for many, many months, with no vacations for years sometimes. It's important to really think about what you're working on, where you're investing your non-refundable lifetime. And think twice, think 10 times about what you're about to embark on. And if things are not working out, don't be afraid to cut bait and just do something else, because you're never going to get that time back in your life. That's really important. And just go for big problems. It takes as much time to work on a small problem and small company as it does to work on a really big one. So go for it. And VCs will tell you that, work on bigger problems, bigger ideas, something that can become a platform, something that can, be worth billions, that can change a billion lives. That's what I would say is go for those kind of things.
No, I think that's actually really good advice, but sadly we're out of time. So how about we close the show with mentioning where people can get more information about Drakestar, the podcast, the book, and any other things you want to mention?
Sure. So you can learn about Drakestar at drakestar.com, and you can look up Drakestar on LinkedIn. We're quite active there. We have lots of announcements and reports and things we publish. So if you're interested in the sectors that we are active in, we're always looking for great new people to join our team as well. We've grown, I think, 50% in the last year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, growing quick. And then as far as everything about me, you can learn on my website, golomb.net, golomb.net. And there's information about the course there as well that's going to be coming this fall. Would love to hear from you. I'm also on Twitter, Vitaly G. Not super active there, but always try to respond to folks who are looking for ideas and answers and help.
Perfect. Well, Vitaly, I really appreciate you again taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you, and have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, Kevin. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Bye.
Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horek. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.